Hey everybody, thank you for coming out tonight to tonight's historical presentation night here at the Yankee Air Museum. We're very excited tonight for me to introduce Mr. Mark Reed, who is the Administrative Director of Operation Nightingale, which is also the topic of tonight's presentation. Operation Nightingale is a veteran-run nonprofit organization that uses the field of archaeology as a therapeutic tool to assist American disabled veterans. Tonight, Mr. Reed will be speaking on the organization and their upcoming plans to excavate a B-17 from a crash site in England. So please help me welcome Mr. Mark Reed.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I came down here, I guess, around this time last year. It was my first visit here, and I was quite impressed. I don't know why I haven't been here before, but as was mentioned, I'm the Administrative Director for Operation Nightingale USA, and I guess a little bit about my background before we move along. Many years ago, way too many years ago, when people were still wearing polyester bell-bottoms, I joined the Marines and spent a good 6.5 years in the Marines, scooting around to various different places. Luckily, there was really nothing going on at the time, so I didn't have to keep my head down. But I left there, went off to Michigan State, got a degree in public policy analysis. While there, I thought, okay, I can't let my military time go to waste, so I joined the Naval Reserve. And people often say, well, why didn't you join the Marine Corps Reserve? And I don't know if there are any Marines in here, but I just could not fathom being a Marine one weekend out of the month. That would just be very difficult to do, so I ended up with the Naval Reserve. When I finished college, I ended up working as a civilian for the Army. So over the course of time, I have had the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Army sort of under my belt. I never quite got to the Air Force, although I guess my only brush with the Air Force, when I was a kid, my pen pal was Eddie Rickenbacker. And he was, 80-something, and I was 10 or 12. And we used to write letters back and forth, and so he was sort of a grandfather figure for me. So I guess I can say I have a little Air Force there, too, somewhere. I've still got the letters. Yeah. My wife wanted me to sell them on eBay. I said, what are you, mad? So they're kind of embarrassing to read, some of the, But anyway, at any rate, I retired from my job with the Army a couple of years ago, and they gave me a nice shadow box. And, it's got all these little doodads in there from 39 years of service with the Marines and the Navy and the Army, and it's all nice and under glass. And I thought, a glass-covered display case is something in a museum, and I'm not ready to have my life be a museum piece, So I thought, well, what can I do with myself? So I ended up going to the University of Liverpool to learn the field of archaeology. So now I have a whole new career. I don't get paid anything because this is it's a nonprofit, and we're just trying to get off the ground. But I think it's a lot of fun, and that's what I'm going to tell you about here tonight. So that's a little on me. Operation Nightingale USA. Repeat it the same. Okay, Operation Nightingale USA, basically we promote the recovery of wounded and injured military veterans using field archaeology as our therapeutic tool. And we emphasize the three goals of community, ability, and archaeology. We integrate the injured veterans into a new community, but as part of that integration, they work alongside other disabled veterans. So we'll have a team of vets that go out into the field, work together for a couple of weeks. It's a communal effort. They're there on site 2 weeks' time. They eat together. They work together. And it's that sort of therapeutic aspect of that community effort that is really the sound part of the program. You know, many vets, and it doesn't matter whether you're disabled, whether you've been injured, wounded, whatever it is, and I'm sure I can count probably more than 2 vets in this room. You know what it's like when you come back into the civilian world. There's this sense that, you know, who the hell are these people? And you don't really relate to them. You know, you want to go back even if you hated your time in service, because there was something there that gave you a sense of purpose. And so that's really what the program strives to do. As far as ability, we don't care what a person's disability is, because we emphasize ability. We have had blind veterans, we've had veterans missing limbs, we've had a lot of veterans with PTSD who brought their service dogs with them. It doesn't matter. You come out, we're going to find you a job to do. I know Carl, our blind veteran, he was an Air Force veteran. He was the king of mattocks. You know, he would get out there with a mattock and just start going at the ground. And he was good at it. So we don't care what the disability is, we're going to put you to work. And archaeology, one of the prime things, and one of the things we had to deal with universities, because universities run these excavations, one of the things we had to deal with was them looking at us and saying, you're not archaeologists, you're a bunch of veterans. You're just going to be out there digging holes. And so we also strive to have top first-class archaeology. So folks running the program are archaeologists, they're veterans, and so they have a foot in both worlds. Sort of a repeat of the last slide I just talked to you about. Okay. Now, a little of the history of the program. This was originally a British program, and it got started back in 2012. Soldiers were coming back from Afghanistan with wounds, and while they were in recovery, they were just hanging around, and morale was dropping. They didn't have a heck of a lot to do. Their unit was still back in Afghanistan. And one of the individuals responsible for their medical care had a background in archaeology. So he got together with another archaeologist within the British Defense Infrastructure Organization, which handles all the British bases. And the two of them came up with this idea for this program to get wounded vets out on archaeology sites. Today they've been going for several years now. The program has had quite a high profile in the UK. They've been featured on radio, on television, they're regularly in the newspapers. I mean, there's some of these things that are listed on the slide are British television programs that are quite popular. Their Time Team is a program that's been on for 20 or 30 years, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with Time Team, but I think pretty much all of their episodes are on YouTube. If anybody's interested in archaeology, I definitely recommend going on YouTube and looking for Time Team. We really don't have that type of public exposure for archaeology in this country. We had Indiana Jones, but pretty much, that's about it. It doesn't reach into the popular imagination quite like it does in Britain. And one of the reasons for the success of the program there is because, you scratch the dirt and you're uncovering history there. And I know in one of our excavations, there's actually pictures of it over here, our objective was a Roman fort. But to get to the Roman fort, we had to go back through 303 rounds from World War II. We had to go down through Victorian debris. We were digging up 16th century bricks. I mean, the farther you went down, it was just going back through time. You can't really do that here. I dig in my backyard and I get worms. Over there, somebody scratches in their garden and they come up with, ancient history. So here in the USA, we incorporated in 2016. Several American veterans had each individually contacted the British just to say, wow, this is a great program. And the British turned around and connected all of us, and we got together and said, okay, let's do this in the States. So we incorporated in 2016, and we're incorporated in Southfield. And not only did the British program connect us, but they were also kind enough to say, okay, you can use the name of our program, and you come on over and you can dig with us. So the digs we've done so far have been connected with the British program very closely. We have several digs that I'll cover in a little bit that are now scheduled here in the States. But again, if you're interested, I have photos of the most recent British dig over there on that trifold board over there. One of the biggest hurdles the program had to get through, as I mentioned, was with the university community. And I said, come on, this is just a bunch of soldiers digging holes. And you see this guy down at the lower left, that's the stereotype a lot of people have of disabled veterans. These guys are damaged goods. And they were worried that, okay, they're going to show up at the site and they're going to be disruptive and they're going to have episodes and they were really a little bit skeptical. Luckily, the program had the ear of the archaeologists within the British Ministry of Defense, and they were able to do a lot to smooth the way. But it's been running for several years now, and universities are lining up now. I've got more universities calling me than we have people to send to excavations. So it's been that successful that the academic community really thinks the program has some merit now. People say, okay, what does archaeology have to do with the military, and what might make veterans good archaeologists? Well, you have to look at the history of modern-day archaeology. And much of modern archaeology was actually developed by military people. And some of these folks, Pitt Rivers was instrumental in first applying scientific methods to archaeology. Up until the 1800s, basically, if there was some landed gent someplace that had some mound on his property, he would just get a bunch of workmen in there and he'd hack through it looking for gold, and that was about it. That was called archaeology. Well, Pitt Rivers came along and said, no. We got to put some method to this. We're destroying half of what has gone before us by getting down just trying to get gold. So he applied methods where he'd take it off layer by layer to see what actually had occurred through time. Flying Officer Crawford applied the notion that, when you're flying over the landscape, you can see a heck of a lot more than if you're walking a field. And so aerial photography became one of the many tools in an archaeologist's toolbox. When crops are planted, as they're growing, they will be greener very often over areas of archaeological interest just because of the deposits in the ground. So you can see by crop marks what might be under the surface. Mortimer Wheeler, he brought a lot of technique. You can see the trench there. He was instrumental in developing the trenching method. Rather than just wiping out the entire structure that you're investigating, dig a trench maybe a couple of meters wide through it. You preserve what you aren't touching because you don't want to just destroy the whole thing. And this will give you an idea of what lies under the ground. It'll allow you to find things and at least sort of make a statistical analysis by looking at how much stuff you're getting out of your trench. It allows you to look at the stratigraphy at the side of the trench. You can see the different layers. So he applied more logical methods to it. And bringing us up to the present day, Colonel Bogdanos from the Marines was the guy who led the team to try to recover a lot of the things that were looted from the Iraqi National Museum. So even today, the military is still engaged in archaeological pursuits. So there's a good fit between archaeology and the military. And archaeology is therapy. It's something that's relatively recent, the notion of rehabilitation archaeology. Usually archaeology is focused on, what's the outcome? What are we going to find? But the theory behind rehabilitation archaeology is to focus on the participants. And one of the main things, there was a comment from one of the participants in Operation Nightingale was, hey, this gives me something to do and time to think. It takes people outside of their normal zone of life, puts them in a completely different environment and gives them a different perspective on things. And maybe they've been trying to work through some problems before they went out onto the field for archaeology, and it gives them time to reflect and kind of hit things anew once they return home. And here's just a few photos here of different things that, different types of things that folks do in the field. I mean, they either do planning at the site, they work with finds cleaning and cataloging, metal detecting, as well as just scraping dirt off of dirt, as archaeology has been described, but everybody gets a job, and it's we don't care what the limitations are as far as we're concerned. There's no limits to what you can do. So another aspect is working with the local community, and whether it's local museums or with school groups. With families, I'll touch on family members later on. There's always a community aspect to this. A couple of previous excavations, and this was our British counterparts that ran this exercise Beowulf for the last few years. This was an Anglo-Saxon cemetery in Wiltshire, Salisbury Plain. And Salisbury Plain is, most people the only thing on Salisbury Plain that most people know is Stonehenge. But Salisbury Plain is very rich in archaeology. If you go to Stonehenge and you look at the landscape around, you can count all kinds of burial mounds along the horizon, earthworks. The landscape's just littered with archaeology. And much of it has seen use from the Stone Age on up through the Anglo-Saxon period, which is what this one's from, and much of it has been reused. So this Anglo-Saxon cemetery was built into an Iron Age, an original Iron Age burial mound. So the Anglo-Saxons just reused this burial mound. It was presumed that it was some sort of sacred space. Project Derventio, which was just this April and May, was a Roman. Derventio was the Roman fort in Malton in Yorkshire, and part of the objective here was to assess damage to the underlying archaeology by burrowing badgers and ornamental trees that had been planted. We spent 3 weeks out in the field excavating this Roman site. And that's there was a lot of feasting that the Romans did. That's a cow horn. So they had found lots of animal bones. Future projects, as I said, we've shifted for Operation Nightingale USA. We've shifted here to the States, and we've lined up some good excavations for next summer. Prohibition-era moonshine stills in North Carolina. And the guy that's actually running this is quite a character. He's with Penn State University. And he just returned from Mongolia, where he'd received some sort of grant to go over there and learn how to make vodka out of horse milk. So, yeah, he considers himself an alcohol archaeologist. Who knew there was such a thing? But yeah. And Fort Necessity, that was the site of George Washington's first military engagement. And it was the battle that launched the French and Indian War. And then Fort Ligonier was part of a string of forts that the British built to protect their supply lines, getting supplies out to the frontier. We're looking forward to these. These should be some pretty interesting excavations. But to bring us up closer to the topic of aviation archaeology, this was a Project Tally Ho several years ago was, again, this was our British counterparts, who will bring a lot of expertise to our search for a B-17 to excavate. But this was the excavation of a Battle of Britain Spitfire. And as you can see there, this machine crashed. The pilot bailed out, so the pilot wasn't killed in the crash. But let's see if I can work this pointer. If you look here, if you picture the wings, you'd have your right wing over there, left wing over here, and the fuselage went there, and it just went straight into the ground. They spent a few weeks excavating that, and this again is on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire. And the reason that Wiltshire pops up a lot is because much of Salisbury Plain is Ministry of Defense property. A lot of military training takes place there. So it's a heck of a lot easier for military archaeologists to get planning permission on a military installation. So that's why you'll see that quite a bit. The pilot's daughter was at the excavation, and she had never met her father. There's a good video on YouTube. Local news interviewed her. He bailed out from this crash, but 8 weeks later he was shot down and killed. And so she never met him, and he never met her. And it was quite poignant for her to actually be there on site. The second Spitfire, this was just in 2015. And you can see, I mentioned, the plane driving into the ground. That pit is 30 feet deep. So this Spitfire drove straight into the ground. The pilot was killed in this crash. And going in at speed, I can't recall the speed that it was going when it hit the ground. But driving in that deep, you can imagine the condition of the airplane. It's pictures of the old Rolls-Royce engine from the plane.
Probably the nose and the tail were one and the same.
Yeah, I would imagine. It was quite... But now this one, in getting permission to excavate a B-17, we've had to agree to certain conditions. And this excavation pointed out reasons for many of these conditions. The original salvage report from World War II from 1940 indicated that a crew arrived on site, retrieved the pilot's remains, buried what they could of the airplane, and returned to base. Mission accomplished. But in going on into the plane, they began to discover personal items of the pilot. There's a cigarette case there at the upper left. And as they went farther, they found partial remains. So probably in 1940, the crew showed up, the recovery crew showed up, got what they could, needed to get back, other pressing things, and they went back and said mission accomplished. But the remains that were found in this excavation in 2015, there were no family members that could be found. So he was given a military burial in Brighton, and you can see a picture of the burial service there at the lower right. So some of the things that we have to look at in doing an excavation, some of the stipulations that there can be no human remains, so we have to be absolutely positive that the entire crew either got out or were retrieved. No payload, tangible surface deposits, so there has to be something remaining on the surface. They don't want us to go in just exploring on the off chance we might hit on it. So we have to be positive that we found a site. Also, potential for good geophysics, meaning the ground has to be conducive to electromagnetic analysis to determine what lies under the surface, and ultimately so that we can identify the extent of the debris field. There should be a record of the breaking up of the airframe and a record of the subsequent pits for burial of the wreckage. The salvage crews were supposed to go in and retrieve, if there was any items of equipment like bomb sites or whatever that they needed to retrieve, they had to bring those back. But the rest of the aircraft, they were supposed to dig a pit and shovel things in. But if you think about it, some of these planes crashed in remote areas. Now, you take a B-17, how big a pit do you have to dig to bury a B-17? You know, and in a remote place, you can't get any mechanical equipment up there. So you'll have a crew on foot with hand tools. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself when it comes to the specific airplanes we're looking at. So I'll just shut up there and I'll kind of continue that thought later. Now, optimally, this will be on British government property. That way, again, it's easier to get planning permission. You don't have to work with the landowners, too closely to ensure that it's just easier if it's on government property. Now, our objectives, we can't just say, okay, we want to find a B-17. That's not good enough as an objective. So what part of the objective is to determine the accuracy of the reports from World War II. So just how accurate were these incident reports? If you have a report that says pilots' remains were retrieved, and then you start digging in and you find that, no, that's not exactly the case, so we know some of the RAF reports were inaccurate. What do the U.S. reports look like? So one objective is to determine accuracy of the reports at the time. Is there any environmental impact? If these reports said certain things were retrieved or certain things were buried, what if they weren't? What if the crew showed up, did what they thought was necessary, and returned to base and just sort of faked the report? So we have to do an environmental impact. We all know that faking reports never happens. Record oral history from anybody in the local area who may happen to remember the crash. And also, what role did that crash site play in subsequent history? You know, I mean, there are stories of kids playing in the 1950s and 60s at crash sites. So, you know, is there any local history about the crash? Also, to connect families of the flight crew. You know, it's been many years since these planes crashed, and you know, one thing we want to do is bring that memory home. Operationally, there's the archaeological aspect. So, geophysical survey to determine the extent of the buried debris. We'll look at the surface scatter. We'll try to accurately plot everything that's both on the surface and under the ground. We'll do a trench excavation with a mixture of military veterans, academic archaeologists, and support staff. And by support staff, you're looking at counselors for any issues that might come up, things like that. There's also an element of community outreach. We'll invite crew family members to come to the site. We'll coordinate with the 8th Air Force Association. Again, record any local histories, and it's already in talks to have a memorial ceremony at Mattingly Cemetery in Cambridge, which was where many USAAF personnel were buried. There will also be a certain social aspect to it. So we'll have fly past by the Sally B, which, if anybody saw the what was it, the Memphis Belle film, that was the stand-in for the Memphis Belle, and also a pub that was used by American airmen during the war, or maybe 2 or 3 pints, or you know, probably hang out there every night. So, what are we looking at? Over the last year or so, we've been going back and forth with our British counterparts, trying to identify a crash site and then home in and get approval to dig. So there's 2 planes we're looking at. The Smilin' Through, which crashed in Baden, Wiltshire, and the Barbara Jane, which crashed on Meltham Moor in Yorkshire. 2 very different circumstances. The Smilin' Through was battle damaged and just couldn't make it anymore. The Barbara Jane crashed on a training flight, and I guess you could put that down to pilot error or navigational error. Crashed into the Pennine Mountains. They didn't realize that they were flying about 3 yards above the ground. So they went down to get under the clouds to get a physical fix and ran into the mountain. So about these planes. The Smilin' Through. Now there's something very interesting about the Smilin' Through. Now you see here, this is the crew according to the Air Force record. And the Smilin' Through took place, is anybody familiar with Black Thursday, the Black Thursday raid on Schweinfurt, Germany? The Smilin' Through crashed on the 14th of October, 1943, returning from the Schweinfurt raid. And there is a YouTube video that was posted, I think last January, so January 2016, by a fellow in Alaska who claims that his father was the pilot of the Smilin' Through, and he gives the date of, and you think, okay, well, he's describing the Smilin' Through, and he's giving a pilot's name that's different from this pilot's name. And he's saying it crashed in Germany, and that some German correspondent of his has sent him pieces of the wreckage. And you think, well, maybe it was a different Smilin' Through. Maybe there was, 2 planes named the same. But he gives the same date of the crash. And he says it was returning from this Black Thursday Schweinfurt raid. So somewhere there's some confusion, apparently. I don't know. I don't think it's in the Air Force record. Maybe it's in this guy's family history, that he thinks it was the Smiling Through. But there's a photo at the crash site. You can see the tail number is the same as the Smiling Through's tail number, and that photo was taken in Wiltshire in England. So, I don't know where the confusion came from, but little of the numbers here. I've got some other numbers here. The total mission, there were 291 aircraft dispatched, 21 from the 384th Bomb Group. Of the original 291 dispatched, and my numbers here didn't give me how many actually returned. So we'll just go with the 384th. Only 5 actually completed the mission successfully, and by completed, they got across, they dropped the payload, and returned to base safely. The rest, either a couple of them didn't get off the ground, 5 aborted before they even crossed the channel, 3 crashed, including the Smiling Through. 6, nobody knows what happened to them. And then only 5, only 24% actually completed the mission safely. Overall, out of the entire mission and the 291, 37 had to abort, 254 crossed the coast, 32 were lost en route to the target, 222 of the 291 actually dropped their bombs. There were 60 planes lost out of the 291. There were 7 planes that weren't lost, but they were damaged beyond repair. And there are 138 other planes damaged that could be repaired. On that single raid, that resulted in 153 people killed in action, 270 prisoners of war. One of those died in captivity. So that was a reasonable survival rate for the POWs, I guess. And in my numbers here, it says number of people returned to duty, 60. Now, I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure that out of the total that crewed those 291 B-17s, that only 60 people returned to duty. There's something strange about that number, so I'm not sure what they mean. But so it was quite a harrowing raid. During the war, the 384th lost 70% of their aircraft. I mean, that's a massive loss. 498 during the course of the war were killed in action. 884 were prisoners of war, and 193 still missing. The other plane we're looking at, the Barbara Jane, was on her training flight. And the normal crew of the plane, for whatever reason, weren't flying. So they asked for volunteers to take this plane on a test flight. It had 2 new engines installed. So the substitute crew took it up. And you see they're just flying with pilot, co-pilot, navigator, radio operator, and engineer. So no gunners, just a routine training run, just testing out new engines. They were headed from, let's see, where were they based? They were based at RAF Rattlesden. So they were flying northwest to towards Manchester, England. And at a certain point, the pilot decided, okay, we've gone far enough. We need to turn around. They weren't really sure where they were. There was a lot of cloud. So they decided to go down below the clouds to take some physical bearings or visual bearings. As they came down out of the clouds, it was only at that time that they realized that they were only yards above the mountains. And so they crashed on Melfa Moor in the Pennine Mountains. And hit the moor at over 100 miles per hour. The pilot, in trying to get visual bearings, had left his seat and gone down into the nose cone to try to get a better view of where they were. So the pilot and the navigator on impact were thrown through the nose cone, and both never walked again. Now, you notice, if we go back to Smiling Through, the only photo of the wreckage we have was taken in 1943. The exact location, see, I remember one of the stipulations was there's got to be surface debris. So this one we'll probably not be able to do this one, because although there is a known location, a general location where the plane went down, nobody's really found it yet physically. This one, you can see there's a lot of debris. This is actual pictures of the Barbara Jane. Where it's located, it's in the Pennine Mountains. There's a lot of sheep up there, but not much else. It's hard to get to. And this is where I say, how accurate were the reports? This plane went down on the 6th of April, 1945. According to the report, the recovery crew went up on the 7th of April and spent one day burying debris. If you've got you have to walk up. I mean, I've climbed these mountains. I've done some digging in these mountains. Well, not the Pennine Mountains, but if you see where the Pennines are, well, I was down here in Wales, so rather close. So mountains are similar. You dig down 6 inches and you're pulling rocks out of the ground. If you have to walk up there, you're not going to take anything mechanical with you, so you've got hand tools. It would take more than one day to dig pits big enough to bury a B-17. There's still a lot of surface debris laying there.
Is that a present day picture?
These are present day pictures, yeah. These were taken within the last year. So, right away you can see that the report was not accurate. These are other pictures of the site. The pilot never really recovered from his injuries. The navigator never walked again either, but his injuries weren't fatal. Winston Johnson, as you see here, he died in 1961, and it was as a result of his spinal injury. So it would be quite an interesting excavation to get up there, and all of this will have to be plotted out. Every piece will have to be sketched, photographed, in place before it can be removed. And as each layer is removed, we'll have to replan the whole thing, draw out a second plan with the next layer that's exposed, and as we go down, continue to draw plans layer by layer. And we'll also spend some time in the local village talking to people that may remember it.
Has no excavation been done on this site at all?
No,
Just the way it's set right
that's the way it sets right there. Yeah, now the one in Wiltshire, the Smiling Through, is pretty easy to get to. So over the years, I'm sure it's been picked clean by souvenir hunters and metal detectorists. So even things that are under the ground have probably been disturbed. So we can't really get a true picture of how things lie. But the Barbara Jane has just been up there for years. And now think about it. There were a lot of planes that went down in Britain. So the landscape is just dotted with wrecks. And it's be quite a challenge. Just to, I mentioned I was in Wales last July, this past July, and similar conditions. We stayed in a nearby village, and every morning we had to climb about a mile. It was a mile's climb up 1,400 feet every morning. We had to remove everything by hand, so no mechanical diggers or anything. And let me tell you, I'm 58, and a lot of the people that were on this thing, because it was a joint excavation with the University of Liverpool, a lot of them were 18-year-old college undergrads. I'm proud of myself. I mean, I was out doing a lot of these 18-year-olds, and so I'm still going.
Excuse me. Just looking at the photo on the top, can you identify anything?
Well, I'm no aviation expert. I could only guess at what's in those pictures. Bits of wings, looks like bits of wheels. One of the reasons we are coordinating with the 8th Air Force Association is trying to get somebody on site who actually knows something about these airplanes. And they can tell us what we're looking at. Field archaeologists, a lot of them have their specialized interests, but you can't always dig on a site that is in your area of interest. My interest is in Anglo-Saxon Britain, but what are my chances of digging Anglo-Saxon sites living here in Southfield? Yep.
Can you identify the part in the picture in the lower right?
Well, again, looks like part of the landing gear to me. Yeah, it does. Yeah. There was another question there? Yep.
Yeah, what about the HE-111s and Messerschmitts and all that? Does the Nightingale organization involve themselves in excavating shot down German aircraft? Because there was a bunch of those went down in the Battle of Britain.
Yeah, we haven't really, and I'm not sure as the American wing of the organization, we were interested in excavating an American aircraft. There may be some political ramifications to that I'm not aware of. That the British and the Germans may view each other's aircraft as somehow extraterritorial. Particularly if people were killed at the sites, there may be, some aspect of them being war graves. I'm not really sure, though. And like I say, as a field archaeologist, I'm not really an expert on, on World War II aircraft or on, Roman forts as we were digging last April. It's you go and you do your technical, play your technical part, and then turn that over to people who are specialists who can analyze the data, look at what was found, look at the surveys from the site, look at the photographs, look at the plans that have been drawn, and then they can piece together a story better than the actual field archaeologist who's on site. Yes.
After 70-odd years, would there be more likelihood that, say, a plane that crashed on the top of a hill or into a mountain, there'd be more left above ground exposed than if it was in a valley? Because
Yeah, more than likely, right, with erosion, but you'd be amazed at how quickly things sink into the ground.
even at the top.
Yeah, even on a mountain. Just by action of everything from the wind and the rain to the worms digging in through the soil. You know, the Earth is literally alive. And I mean, all you got to do is ask my wife about that old truck that's been parked out next to my garage that is slowly sinking into the ground, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that, you know, the phenomena of archaeology, or whatever you want to call it, I always questioned, you know, when things are like 20 feet underground, did the diameter of the earth get 20 feet bigger, or it just, it keeps sinking?
Well, there are a lot of factors to that. Sometimes things are just covered up. They're built on top of. You know, and rather than carting everything away, you know, let's just level it, heap a little more dirt on it, and, you know, and build again. So sometimes it's human action. Sometimes it's the action of nature that's burying things. I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into the layers in the earth. You go to some places and you'll have to go 20 feet down to find the same era that in another location you'd only have to go 3 inches into the ground. I mean, it's not consistent from place to place, and it just depends on the local environmental factors.
The other question I had was, there's got to be a lot of aircraft that are crashed in England, and I'm sure not all on public property. Don't a lot of people complain about when you're going to get this wreck out of here?
Well, you know, over there, again, I mentioned earlier that archaeology has a much higher public profile there than it does here. You cannot get planning permission to do anything without getting an archaeologist involved. If you want to put an extension on your house, an archaeologist has to come out and do a survey. And so very often, you know, like enterprising people do, they'll just cart that stuff away. You know, they don't want to get the government involved, you know, because that means that, you know, another property is going to be bound up in legal wrangling for the next who knows how long. So, but yeah, you're right. There's a lot of these things all over the place, and most that were in areas of high habitation. Most are gone. You know, they've already been carted off. But a lot that are in these remote areas, the only, like I said, the only people that ever go up there are sheep. So, which is another reason things get buried. Sheep drop a lot of stuff too.
Somebody had a question over there about German planes, excavations. I knew I was coming here about this book. I know the author. He lives in England, and in this book they have a couple German excavations that they've done. He's done a lot of things on the Time Team show and that kind of thing, but they are allowed to do it, and they have done them.
Who's that by?
Nick Witherspoon.
Nick Witherspoon.
I think he does most of his stuff in the northern part of England.
Well, you're talking about climbing those mountains. Can't you hire a helicopter to come in there?
Sure. Well, I'll just reach into my pocket and shell out for it. Well, it's all a matter of money.
You just can't afford to do that.
Just can't afford to do it. I mean, if we could, I know on the excavation there in Wales, the closest we got to a helicopter was a little drone that was used to go up and take aerial photos. But yeah, we just wouldn't be able to afford that. I mean, I wish we could. You know, there are a lot of these veterans archaeology projects underway, and one of them that's doing relatively financially successful is an outfit called Waterloo Uncovered, and this is run by some former and current members of the Coldstream Guards, and they're excavating the battlefield at Waterloo. They have luckily got all kinds of financial backing, and it just depends on who your connections are, and I'm sure you know, I don't have to tell too many people in here with a nonprofit organization, you know, you have got to do a lot of politicking and a lot of.
Yeah, the Coldstream Guards has a heck of a name recognition. It
Oh,
makes it a lot easier.
I know, and these guys guard the Queen, you know. I mean, pick a better connection, you know. So it's that's another one. If you got your pens and pencils handy, Mark Evans is the guy in charge of Waterloo Uncovered, and he's an Iraq vet, and he's written a book called Code Black about his experiences in Iraq. If anybody's interested, but it's quite an interesting read about you know, what he went through in Iraq and how he worked through things after he left the Coldstream Guards, and how he dealt with his own demons, so to speak, from his experiences. Pretty good book. You don't really have to read through all of this. I just plopped that up there. I just picked some emails. The biggest thing we're going through, the biggest challenge, I guess, is the transatlantic coordination. You know, we've got to do a lot by email, a lot by phone calls. We do have, one of our folks is actually based in England, so, you know, he can get in his car and drive a couple hours to meet with people, but still a lot of it's got to be done by email. And a lot of it, you know, there are changes that occur along the way within the British organization. You know, they have shifting priorities, and so we're getting closer to this, but it's taking us a bit longer than we expected it to. So I'm not really sure we're going to get it off the ground next year, but we're getting there. We've at least identified some sites. That's pretty much all I've got. If you're interested in more information on our program, there's some websites you can go to, our website and our Facebook page. I also have some literature over here that's got those websites on it, so you don't necessarily have to write it down. There's also several good YouTube videos. One is about the World War II Spitfire, Battle of Britain Spitfire. The other is a Time Team episode dealing with Operation Nightingale. And the other is some clip from our excavation of the Roman fort in Malton in Yorkshire. Are there any other questions? Because I think I'm pretty much wrapped up.
The 1945 incident, that was a test of engines? What
Yes.
kind of engines? Could you say anything about the engines?
I didn't see anything in my research on what types of engines. I guess based on your question, B-17s could probably be fitted with different types of engines. And I don't know what the damage was to the original engines or the reason for the refit, but they had two new engines installed. And
Could just be that the old engines wore out and they needed to replace
yeah,
them.
could have been. Yeah, and it's interesting that, you know, they had decided that, oh yeah, everything's fine, the engines are perfect. So it wasn't failure of the new engines. It was just they didn't know where they were, which is pretty tragic, and ended up in two of them being seriously injured. The others, even though they hit the ground at 100 miles per hour, the rest of the crew was just scratched, which seems totally amazing to me. The crew of the Smiling Through, which crashed there in Wilshire, every one of them bailed out, so they all survived.
You were talking about the crew of the one test flight. Isn't it normal practice on a test flight that you go with minimum crew?
I would imagine. Again, I'm not an aviation historian. I'm an old jarhead, you know. But from what I was reading, that's why they just had the radio operator, navigator.
I was a maintenance officer for helicopters, and I flew them too. And that was our procedure, minimum crew.
Yeah.
Thinking back to during the war, we were seeing, scrap drives for everything here, particularly aluminum. What was their thinking in burying these wrecks rather than hauling them back to the smelter and melting them down and making newer planes?
Yeah, and it was everybody's war effort, whether you were an American or a Brit. So you'd think, if nothing else, let the Brits have it, because we were making stuff out of our scrap metal and giving it to the Brits anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to recover all of that stuff as much as possible.
Rolls-Royce recovered some of the Merlin engines from wrecks, and that was the start of the Meteor engine that they put in the tanks. Was they were recovered Merlins that they couldn't put in an airplane again because they crashed. But why bury a whole B-17 worth of aluminum?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Navy. There are times they just dump things over the side, so it's operational necessity, yeah. But that makes sense, get a crew of the British Home Guard and send them up there to do retrieval. I don't know why they wouldn't have done that.
Okay, so how are the vets involved? Are you actually raising money to pay to get them to these sites? It's bad enough to get them to North Carolina. You're getting a group to go to England for months?
Yeah, what we pay for is their lodging, their food, the equipment they need, and local transportation. If they go to England, they've got to get themselves to England. Right now, I mean, it would be wonderful to have the budget to, buy everybody airplane tickets. But at this stage of the game, we're not there yet. And that was what we did in Malton. We had crew of 6 vets showed up from the States, and plus our personnel. We had about 10 Americans on that excavation, but we all had to pay our way to get there. And luckily, there we negotiated a deal with the Royal Air Force, and we stayed on a Royal Air Force base, and then would commute every morning to the excavation site, which was a pretty good deal. So.
Do you deal with the DoD organizations responsible for remains at all?
No, I mean, the excavations we have planned for 2017 really won't involve areas where we'd be likely to encounter remains. I know the British, the archaeological program is part of their defense infrastructure organization. So, they're tied right into to that, but we really haven't put that into our planning, at least not for the currently planned ones. And for these locations, we're absolutely certain that all the crew got out. That wouldn't be a factor here either. Yes.
I just want to thank you for being here and presenting this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I would say, we're a nonprofit, and we're doing this on a shoestring right now. I mean, we all believe in the program, or else we wouldn't be doing it. And if anybody wants to help us out, on our website, you can click right there, and it'll take you right to PayPal. And I would really thank you from the bottom of my heart if you did help us out. All right, if there's no more questions, I thank you for having me here.